Ladies and gentlemen, this is Gaming Silicon video. We're going to be going through my thoughts and opinions of Microsoft's E3 press conference for 2014. So it's literally just finished, and I have to say that I'm a lot more impressed with this year's than their previous effort. Microsoft said right out the get-go, or rather Phil Spencer said right off the get-go, that they were focused entirely on games for E3, and it shows. And indeed, it was obviously a demonstration right off the bat by the folks over Xbox that, yeah, we listened to your criticisms last time and they're not going to be here right now. And indeed, before it's even started, before E3 even started officially, the press conference got underway. Larry Hryb was outside interviewing the various folks, the developers who were coming in, and even announced a new achievement app, which apparently will function alongside Snap mode, so you're going to be able to sort out your achievements. You're going to be able to track them in real time. So let's say for example, it will automatically track how close you are to a particular achievements. The ones you're closest to unlocking will appear near the top. You can, however, adjust this. So for example, let's say you're searching for a particular achievement. Let's say you want to track an achievement which is get 50 headshots. You can put that to the top and pin it, and you could even search for guides on how to get these achievements directly from the interface. But all it's going to basically do is open up your web browser. And in fact, a trailer while the event was just about to start, Killer Instinct shown off a new character that's coming, TJ Combo. He's coming with Season 2, which is going to be apparently starting fall 2014. So right off the bat, Microsoft pushed and focused on games, and there were obviously not talking about, there was no mention at all about TV. There was virtually no mention of Kinect. In fact, the only mention of Kinect was from one or two games, primarily from, for example, Fantasia. But other than that, it was games, games, games. None of the media, none of the apps, none of the integration, none of the split screen for TV, and any of that was there. There was no mention of sports. They completely and utterly obliterated that, and E3 was firmly relegated purely to games, which in my opinion is just how it should be. So Sledgehammer Games started out with Call of Duty, where characters, viewers were introduced to Mitchell. So he basically started out on a drop pod, and then it was live, so the person was playing it, at least we assume it was live, and right off the bat, within just a few seconds, the player was running around with other AI using mech suits, tanks. There was even huge mechanical walkers that looked a little bit like AT-ATs, that's AT-ATs from Star Wars, and it definitely looked very visually impressive, assuming it was running on Xbox hardware, of course. Microsoft were very keen to point out, might I add, that a lot of this content you're going to be seeing first on Xbox, although they didn't specify too much about that. But I've got to say, even myself, who's not a huge Call of Duty or first-person shooter fan anymore, I've got to admit there was a couple of parts where I did get large chills, particularly when hundreds of these drone-like things started to swarm you. In fact, it did remind me a little bit of the Krill from Gears of War, just in terms of how they dart around the air, or even from Chronicles of Riddick. You might be aware of the similar type of... Sorry guys, I completely forgot to mute my phone there. Other titles, for example, Forza was shown off, and the team proudly announced it was going to be running at 1080p 60. And indeed, you'll notice that they actually mentioned the resolution several times throughout the entire conference. It was mentioned even in Halo. I'll get to that in just a moment, where they pointed out Halo was going to be running at 1080p 60. So obviously, Microsoft are a little bit nervous about the whole resolution war. They're at least trying to stem it somewhat, which I don't particularly feel is a big problem. Evolve was also shown off, exclusive beta and DLC on the Xbox One, and I've got to say that also looked very impressive. I do feel that the folks over at Microsoft did a really good job in comparison to last year. The reaction from the crowd was a lot better. There were a couple of muted, kind of... But for the most part, it sounded really good. the crowd was obviously impressed. They weren't waiting for applause, and it was obviously they were a lot more excited. With that said, despite the fact that certain games, like for example Crackdown, was shown, I do feel that a couple of titles were suspiciously absent. One of my friends who was watching the conference immediately remarked to me, "Where was Gears of War?" Seriously. And then we were like, I'm sure it's going to be shown at some point. I was almost positive we were going to get at least a trailer. But Gears of War was shown in the briefest sense. There was a half a second, quite literally, of a logo shown towards the very closing of the event. It was literally just the logo. There was no images of the gameplay, no nothing, just the logo. And in fact, it was shown around the same time as Watch Dogs. I believe it was Watch Dogs, then another game, and then Gears of War or something similar. Microsoft obviously formed a better relationship with indie developers. They were a lot more courteous to them. They shared the spotlight a lot better, which is certainly a good thing. But it's too early to know how Microsoft have done in the grand scheme of things. Sony haven't had their conference yet. Nintendo haven't had their conference yet. And so, of course, we're judging things in a very isolated manner right now. Obviously, a huge amount of attention was pushed towards Halo. And indeed, they actually got some professional Halo players, pro Halo players, to show off various bits of gameplay. The next Halo, indeed, Bonnie Ross said the Master Chief is going on some type of personal journey, searching for the truth. And someone else is searching for him, and they're basically trying to find out not only about his past, but where his future is going to be going. And in 11th November, you're going to be able to play all of the Halo titles with the Master Chief Collection. And that means we're going to be seeing Halo 1, 2, 3, and 4. All of the games are also going to be unlocked, which is pretty awesome. At this point, the crowd were really hyped. You could just tell that they were excited. You could just tell that the atmosphere was really on the side of Microsoft. It was very pro Halo, and as the music started to play, and as the lights started to dim, and the gameplay started, I've got to admit, it was very cool. And at this point, you knew that Microsoft had amazingly outperformed themselves from previously. And I honestly feel that despite the fact that some may say, well, it's just Halo in better resolution and stuff like that, people still love Halo, all of the series, especially Halo 2 multiplayer. So I think for a lot of people it's going to be cool, particularly as you're going to be able to play some of the a lot of this with 6 new maps in, fully utilizing the Xbox One's performance. And indeed, as I mentioned, all of it's going to be 1080p, 60 frames a second. So some personal opinions here. I have to confess, I wasn't really interested in a couple of titles shown off that were obviously really big titles for Microsoft. Sunset Overdrive, I was a bit meh on. I thought it looked kind of cool in terms of overall aesthetic and so on, but maybe if I play it, I'll feel differently. But there are so many of these open world type of games at the moment, and I don't want to come as like a downer, but it really didn't strike me as the type of game where I'm going to be like, wow, this is what I want. This is really, really what I want. Having said that, I'm also someone who doesn't really like the style of Crackdown 3, which was also announced. I don't know why, like those non-serious type of games. I mean, like the pure limit that I generally go to personally is something like Borderlands 2. Like that's generally about as far as I go with my level of humor in games. I don't know why. I'm just that type of person. On the other hand, because we've got Red Gaming Tech chat, like a private chat for all of the members of RGT. And we've got this going on WhatsApp, right? And I was like, unsure about Crackdown. And I got thoroughly reamed by like 2 or 3 people in the chat who were like, "What are you talking about? Halo Crackdown's like amazing." So maybe I'm just like alone in that. Now, when the other major title apart from Halo was shown off, that would of course be Fable. I've got to say, I was initially a little bit, I'm unsure. One of the first notes that I made with Fable, first of all, Fable Legends, the multiplayer beta is coming on a holiday, but one of the very first notes that I made was that animation looked a bit awkward. and facial details looked a bit odd. And I think it was just like the way they were running initially. Like when they stopped, it kind of looked a bit too abrupt. I know that sounds really weird of a note, but I couldn't unsee it every time I watched the characters run at the very beginning. But after a few seconds of them actually showing the game off, I was like, actually, this looks really cool. It's focused on co-op gaming, and they're saying, of course, unique and innovative, which is fine. But you can actually control the villain in this co-op, so you actually get to play it almost like a dungeon keeper type of role. So you basically get to decide on how to target various players, what monsters and stuff you want to be using. I'm assuming some of it wasn't really explained that well, so I basically had to just kind of ascertain and guess. But it looked kind of cool. So, for example, in this respect, it's almost like 5v1. So, for example, you and three other buddies could, for example, be taking me on while I play as the evil villain, and you're trying to get into my lair. And it looked kind of cool, I've got to say. I want to see more of the actual gameplay, but overall, the reception was pretty good. The title got a really good rise out of the audience, and I've got to say that I was pretty impressed by it. I actually kind of wanted to play it and just have a go with the various different modes. I did definitely get the feeling that at a couple of points, both Larry and Phil were a bit nervous. This, particularly at the start, they obviously were a bit nervous considering the previous show, and in fact, quite a lot of the time, they were actually showing off like how many games they talked a lot about how many games they would each play, and they were focused all the time on games like your favorite game and your favorite game. And they were speaking to developers, and they would constantly have these little mini breaks, if you will, where they would have developers sat kind of like on a set or at a certain location, and they would have them speak about what their favorite type of game was, or what their ideal game was, or what motivated them. And it was all a little bit cheesy and a little bit all set up, but you know what? I actually kind of liked it. I felt it added a bit of levity to the situation, and in addition to that, I thought it worked really well. It was actually kind of funny because at one point, the folks over at Respawn were speaking to Larry, and they were actually talking about where Larry had actually just completely by chance got matched up against a couple of folks over at Respawn, and apparently they kicked his butt. Well, to be fair, they had kind of a leg up since they developed the title and all, so I kind of expect them to be better. And he also had moments where he was saying about how he wanted to, organise events with him, like the folks over at Xbox versus the folks over at Respawn, and I thought it added a lot of... You could tell that they were just wanting to point out that, no, we're gamers. At the end of the day, we are gamers. We know what you guys want. We want the same thing. And it almost felt like an apology for the last E3. So, I've been quite positive about their event so far. What criticisms would I personally level? Well, there are a couple. I think the biggest criticism is that you got the feeling that there were games that they just couldn't show off at this point. Obviously, the biggest one, and the one that I felt was the biggest kick in the teeth, was certainly Gears of War. We know they're working on it at this point. We're, 99.999% positive that we're going to be seeing something of it at some point pretty soon, but obviously they just weren't confident enough to show off anything at this point. And I actually felt really disappointed by that. I really do. I feel that one problem is it's very difficult to judge quite who's won E3 at this point. Like, have Microsoft done enough? Sony know whether Sony have an idea of whether they've gotten beaten or are in the same kind of area yet in terms of how well they've achieved, because obviously Sony know what games, and there were some rumours stating that Sony were only going to unveil certain games if they felt they needed the extra ammo. So in other words, if they felt, okay, Microsoft didn't really hit it as far out of the park as what we'd thought they might, let's just keep these games back for like another conference. On the other hand, if they felt that, oh dear, Microsoft pulled out some tricks last minute and our current lineup just isn't going to be quite there. The rumour has it that Sony were basically having some games kind of in reserve. Now, whether this is true or not, we don't know, and most likely we never will know, because obviously if the titles are shown, it's not like they're going to say, well, you know, the folks over at Microsoft did this, so we have to do this in counter. But I did get the feeling a couple of times over where I did want to see a couple of other exclusives. Unfortunately, this is just how it is in gaming these days, where exclusives are very difficult to attain unless you're doing it in-house, because ultimately it comes down to a lot of cash. And there was certainly barely any mention of Kinect, which I feel personally is a good thing, but then it could also perhaps slightly piss off people who are really interested in Kinect, because Microsoft have also said, well, you know what, we're going to be still supporting Kinect and pushing Kinect, so I am curious how that all pans out, really. Finally, my major criticism was that quite a few games really did focus on Xbox Live and the whole multiplayer infrastructure. Several times out, they pointed out, well, you know, dedicated servers, and multiplayer. I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but there were precious few, in my opinion anyway, single-player focused games, at least in comparison, and indeed even single-player games that would have traditionally, well, at least traditional single-player games, like for example Assassin's Creed, was shown off in multiplayer. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a major criticism against Microsoft, because ultimately, at the end of the day, the gaming experience now is pushing more towards, is veering more towards multiplayer. For a lot of titles anyway, but for me personally, I don't mind multiplayer in certain games. Like, for example, I'll typically play multiplayer in like an FPS after I've completed the single player. But a lot of the time, if I'm playing story mode, I just disable it, whether it's on console or whether it's on PC. I'll just disable the multiplayer mode, because I just don't want the hassle. I just want to play the game, enjoy it, single player, because that's kind of how I wanted to play the story. But you know what? That doesn't really bother me, as long as the titles aren't nerfed. And I don't really like the term, but whatever. Nerfed for single player, so you can still enjoy them as you would expect. Fine. I would say that Microsoft didn't really have a killer moment. They definitely had moments where the crowd was significantly more on their side than the previous E3. Overall, the folks over at Microsoft, folks over at Xbox, they impressed. The journalists, the crowd were quite hyped. On the other hand, there was no single game, there was no single announcement where I felt that they went absolutely crazy. I do feel some of this was due to leaks. Like, for example, the whole Halo thing. We knew about it. We knew about the anniversary because of leaks previously, or at least that were kind of hinting towards a lot of it, which did take away from some of the excitement. So overall, I feel that Microsoft did well in their press conference. I feel that it wasn't perfect, but I don't feel any E3 ever will be. I'm very much looking forward to see Sony's and Nintendo's. I would say I'm actually looking forward to seeing Nintendo's more than Sony's in a way, because Nintendo seem to be really up in the air. And I want to see what Nintendo have to counter a very solid conference from Microsoft. There wasn't any surprises from from Microsoft. There weren't anything that really was like, oh my god, like Crackdown was announced, we kind of knew that was coming, Halo, kind of knew that was coming, Sunset Overdrive. It felt a very safe conference, solid, but safe. I would like to see Nintendo just go crazy, basically, just announce something that everyone's like, what the hell, oh my goodness, never would have expected that. And maybe do the same from Sony. But I guess we're just going to have to see. So if I had to categorize Microsoft's conference, it was unoffending, it was good, it was decent, it was solid, it felt very safe. There weren't that many announcements that really shocked. We saw a very brief glimpse of Tomb Raider, a new Tomb Raider, for example. But once again, we kind of knew it was happening anyway, so once again, not really a shock announcement. I've got to say, one title that really did excite me was The Division. I really like the look of that, and I definitely think it's going to be one of the games that, along with Evolve, are definitely going to kind of help make my year. Anyway, guys, I think that's just about me prattling on. Give me your thoughts. Go ahead. Make my day. Anyway, I'll see you soon. Take care, and bye for now.